What's up? How you doing? Here we are. Beautiful night tonight. Beautiful night. Fresh water. Delicious. Very good. That's good water. I have a filtration system, but the water is really tasty. Really tasty. I just changed the filter last night. Put a brand new one in there. Got to keep on top of these things. I was thinking today about sometimes I feel like I feel like those old people from the Great Depression that were in their prime during the 1930s, and then you talk to them in the 80s and they would tell you how it was back then and how people were different and all that. Sometimes I feel like that with the current generation of kids. It's like I look at them and they're on their iPhones 80% of the time, on the couch, totally different from the way I grew up. When I grew up, it was just constantly hanging out with your friends, going to the little store up the street to buy gum, always on an adventure, especially on the weekends, and I don't see that anymore. Now everything's planned. Everything's planned. Every parent is afraid to let their kids go and play on their own. They got to make a call. Hey, my kid wants to play with your kid. I mean, now it's getting less because my kids are getting older, so I don't have that as much as I did. But when they were younger, it was like everything was arranged. It was like emails sent back and forth. It's like my kid wants to play with your kid. You guys available Saturday? And then you'd end up, playing with the parent, hanging out with them. Yeah, in my time, there was no involvement from my parents. They never called any parent up to make a rendezvous for me. I would get up. Of course, I'd watch my cartoons. That was a big deal back when I was a kid. Now they don't watch anything. But back then, I would get up, watch my cartoons, and then later on, I'd find someone. Sometimes I didn't watch cartoons. Sometimes I would just get up and go downstairs early, and there was always somebody downstairs that wanted to play. I remember one time I had a friend of mine. He lived 2 doors over. And it was a Saturday, and I got up 7 a.m., got ready, summertime, I remember it was summertime, and I went over to his house, and I went up his driveway, and they had a little wall next to the driveway, and I got up on that wall, and I was just hanging around, waiting for him to wake up. And I remember at some point, his mother opened up the door, probably saw me, and she's like, what's he doing here on our property? But I was just waiting, and then he came out, and we played all day. That's how it was back then, He had 2 sisters, and we'd go on an adventure, and he didn't have the kind of mother to say, hey, where were you? Where'd you go? Didn't I tell you to hang around the backyard? We would take off. We had like 6 or 7 houses that did not belong to us, but we treated them as if they were ours. We'd run in their yards. We'd play hide and go seek in their yards. I remember there was this old couple. They had to be in their 70s back then, and they had a house up on the hill with a big mulberry tree in the front. And they had these weird bushes. The bushes created canopies, and we would go and hide in there. And we'd hide in there, and then the old man would come out yelling, get out of here, get off the property. And then he had these bushes in the back. We would go in there. We were in his yard constantly, and they were in their house just watching TV. They were retired, who knows. I remember one Saturday, I got up, I was up early, and we were going to go somewhere. My father had the station wagon warming up. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go up to that house, and I'm going to eat some mulberries. So That's he's waiting to wrap around a tree. Anyway, so I went up there. I went in his yard. I climbed the tree. I was probably about 8 years old, and I started eating the mulberries. Boom, 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 boom. At some point, he must have noticed me. He must have looked, and he said, "Oh, there's a kid in the tree." He opens up the door and he starts yelling, "Get down from that tree!" And I couldn't get down there fast enough. I felt like he was coming after me. So I jumped down, boom, boom. I ran up the sidewalk and I disappeared. They're long gone now. I mean, back then I was like 8. They were like mid-70s. But I don't even know who lives there now. Then there was a three-decker across the street from my friend's house, diagonally across, and we made that place our own. And that one, it was like a ghost house. We never saw people come out and yell at us. They just let us play in their yard, you know. And then next door I had another friend. The houses were connected to that three-decker, and we'd go in there and play air hockey. So there was always some place to go. You know, you'd be with this friend for a couple of hours, then you'd find this friend and be with them for about 2 or 3 hours. And it was a fun time growing up when I was a kid. There was a lot of kids in my neighborhood, a lot of friends. Always had something to do, always getting involved in something. One time we were like about 10 blocks away from my house, and there was a road. It was kind of like, you know, like this, and then it had a steep climb towards the end, and on the left-hand side there was a house, and then there's a main street up here where the hill connects, but the houses were down below, and they had these walls in the backyard, and we were in there playing on the wall, digging into the wall. Never knew these people before, just met them that day. We were there fooling around, playing in their backyard. Now I see kids, they don't even ride bikes anymore. I don't know how many times I've said it, but you know what? When I was a kid, the bike to me was like the horse was for the Cartwrights on Bonanza. You know, always had the bike with me. And it was like a car, you know. Sometimes late in the evening when I would, you know, return to my house, I'd be very tired and I'd be on my bike riding it. And I was picturing, you know, like I was coming home from a long journey with a person in the back seat that was sleeping, and I had to avoid all the bumps because I was trying to let them rest. Now nobody rides a bike. Like, they ride a bike, but it's all planned. Nothing is spontaneous. Now you see them with their helmets, get the goggles on. You know, some of them wear pads, elbow pads, knee pads. Different world. I think, you know, if you were to live forever, I don't think it's a good idea. I think psychologically you wouldn't be able to take it. You would see so many changes that you would no longer be able to identify your own self within the world you live. You'd feel weird. It was like, what am I doing here? Everything's different, you know. But when I was a kid, you know, you had kids that hung around in front of a convenience store. We had a little every store had 3 or 4 kids that were the regulars. You know, I remember there was a little store, variety store. My father would stop there for milk, bread, things like that. And there was always like 4 teenagers in the front, no matter when you went. Could have gone 8 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night. They were still there. And they were nice. They didn't bother you. You know, you'd pass them and go in and shop and then leave. But every store, you know, 7-Eleven, whatever it was, they had their own group of teenagers that hung around the front. Now, homeless people hang around the front. They open the door for you. You know, back then you didn't see that. You didn't see the homeless people opening the door for you. Back then it was teenagers hanging out in the front. You know, sometimes you'd see kids walking home from the field after playing baseball. Yeah, now it's different. You know, like, if this was my time as a kid, you would see tons of kids on their bikes just riding around, you know, all over the place. Some of them would be, you know, riding fast, some of them slow. Then you'd see a bunch of them in the convenience store buying beverages. You know, like I feel like when we were kids, we were like miniature adults. You know, you had a few bucks in your pocket, you would go to Burger King, you would go to the little store, buy some stuff, negotiating the price, paying. Now, I don't know. You know, nobody plays anymore. Nobody plays. And it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. The more technology develops, the more you'll just sit on the couch and just play on the couch watching yourself on virtual reality shows. Simulation. Water's so good. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I played enough for about 5 kids. That's how much I played. I played every day. I played hard. I was having adventures all the time. All the time. You know, I mean, I think about my childhood. I had so much fun. Such a good time. You know, we explored every corner of our neighborhood. And they let us. They let us. Now it's like, where'd they go? Where are they? Where, you know, they feel like, you know, the abduction rate has skyrocketed 300%, and they won't let you out of their sight. When I would go to the mall with my parents when I was little, I would disappear. I would go, like, they would be in one like store, and I would be all the way on the other side of the mall in another store. Sometimes I couldn't find them, so I'd get them paged. I'd search for them for like an hour, and then I'd start to think I'm never going to see them again. So I'd go to the front, I'd say, can you page these people? Because I can't find them. And then you'd see my father showing up. But I used to disappear. Nobody would worry. Nobody would say, hey, we haven't seen him in like 6 hours. Where is he? They didn't care, you know. They would say, oh, he's somewhere in the mall. And the mall, there's another thing. The mall was a big deal. You know, sometimes it would be a quiet evening and, you know, sitting there doing nothing at home. My father would look at us and say, you want to go to Sears? And everybody was like, yeah, let's go to Sears. And Sears was code for the mall. They never called it the mall. My parents didn't even know what that word was. Had no idea what the mall meant. They knew it was just Sears and 80 other stores. I remember when I was in school, like in high school, I always pictured housewives during the daytime getting in their cars and just hanging around the mall. You know, just walking around, sitting on a bench at the mall. You know, so yeah, that's what I thought they did. Besides Valium. But different time. Things have really changed. I mean, you know, children are like, it's tough to describe. They're like, physically they look the way we did, but mentally they seem like they don't know how to negotiate their way through a store anymore, or they never did. You know, like when I was a kid, we were always doing something. We'd go up, they get a slush puppy or something, or get a bunch of gum, or caps was another big deal. You know, caps used to have these guns that you'd put the caps in. Well, we never messed around with the gun part, but the caps, we'd get those red rolls that were caps, and then we'd get rocks and smash them, and you'd hear little like miniature firecrackers go off. And I think everybody feels that way, you know, when they look at the next generation and their childhood. They always say, oh man, if you only lived the way I lived in my childhood, you would see how much better it was. Everybody thinks that their childhood was better, and I have fallen into that too. You know, I see how it is now, and I go, it doesn't seem fun to me. You know, back then we were more, I know what the word is, back then we were more independent. You know, as children, we were little, but we were independent, you know. Like, you could be 5 years old, and your mother would be like, okay, go out and play. I know not all mothers were like that, but mine was. You know, and then I would be 5 years old. I remember being 5 years old, and maybe I was 4, and hanging around like a block away from my house with this kid who was a lot older. He was, not a lot, but see, I was 4 or 5, and he was probably like 11. And he loved hockey. So I remember one time I was talking to him. He had his outfit on. He was a goalie, and we're just talking there. Like we're businessmen or something, just discussing things. And I don't even want to get into but I am the railroad tracks. I was first grade, and we would go and hang out at the railroad tracks every single day after school. We hung around at the railroad tracks. So school would get out at, like, say 2:10. We'd cross over the field. There was a railroad system there. It was there since the Civil War, and they had this old dingy train go by once in a while, and we would play there for like an hour or so and then go home. Not one time did my mother say to me, when's your school get over? When's that? What time is that when your school finishes? Because I was always home at like 3:30. And I would say, I don't know. Why? And she would say, because you're always getting home at 3:30. Doesn't your school get off at like 2:10? So I'd be like, I don't know. But we played, and we played. I mean, the railroad tracks was a huge part of my childhood. We were there every day after school. And then after that, we'd go to the auto parts store. We had a few stops. When I got a little bit older, I had another friend. This friend of mine always had money. He'd always pull up money. And I was like, what does this guy do? Always has money. And I don't mean like he had like $10. He had like $100 on him, in fives and tens. Always had money on him. And I remember he knew all the little store owners. There was a jeweler in my neighborhood, and we'd go in there. That was one of our pit stops. And he'd say, hey, how you guys doing today? And we'd go, we're doing good. How you doing? And his breath, not bad, but 100% coffee. Like he would get in there and talk to us, and all you smelled was like as if somebody had stale coffee in a cup, and it was underneath your nose. It was like, it was like very, very potent stale coffee smell coming out of his mouth, out of his teeth. So that's probably what he did all day. He was an older guy. I want to say he looked like he was probably early 60s. And I remember it was a small jewelry store. It does not exist anymore. But it was mostly watches. And me and my friend would go in there and talk to this guy for like 15 minutes every other day. And then we'd leave. Like leave it to Beaver. Then there was a little restaurant, mainly served soup. And me and my friend would go to the counter and sit there and order soup. And every other person on that counter was like in their 80s. And then we were there, we were two kids in the 5th grade, and we'd get that chicken soup. Big difference though. And then when I was in the 6th grade, I started riding the train system. I'd take off from my house. My mother thought I was in the neighborhood. She didn't know. Even now, if you tell it to her, she'd be like, when did this happen? I'm like, go back to sleep. So I would get my money, my change. I always counted it out. I knew what the bus was. I knew what the trains were. So I always had the amount of money to go and come back and maybe get a sandwich. So I would get on the trains early in the morning, and I would ride and ride and ride all day. Then I'd stop for lunch, get my Burger King was my stop. I'd get Burger King, and then I'd get back on the trains, and I would be all over the city. One time I ended up at the beach in the wintertime. First time I was at the beach, and there was snow on the sand. And I was walking around, I go, man, nobody knows I'm here. But I used to get on the trains all the time, the subway system. I was like, I bet you there were people that were on that train, and they would see me and they go, oh, there's that kid again. But I was like a subway rat. And that was 6th grade. And I used to call my friends, hey, you want to go to the arcade downtown? And they'd say, yeah, and I'd take them, and we'd go down there. Yeah, I did not do the drugs. Did not get involved with that stuff ever. But I did explore a lot. I did get on the trains and do that kind of stuff, which a lot of kids my age back then did not do. They hung around. Yeah, they played, but they played in their neighborhood. I used to go all far out, miles and miles away. And if they, I think about it now. There was not one time where I got home, my father and my mother were like, "We were looking for you all day. Where the hell were you?" Never happened. Never happened. I would disappear, and then I would get home, and they never searched for me. They never said, "You know what? We needed you for something 3 hours ago, and we got in the car and we looked all over the neighborhood. Where were you?" Never happened. And I'm glad it didn't, because that would have annoyed me. Yeah, it's a different time. Different time. We used to create fun. When there was nothing to do, we would find some place to go and kill time. Now you sit on the couch. You're in like a virtual reality. Clear skies right now. Too much light pollution. The light, you don't see the stars. Now, right now, if I was down at Barango Springs, there would be thousands of stars in the sky. But here, in the city, you only see the planets, you don't see the stars. Too bright. Another day. Take a time machine. You sit here and time just goes by you. Slowly, slowly. We're like picture frames, multiple ones going from 1 second to the next to the next. I feel like a good ice cream, something like that. It's probably been like about 100 years since I've had a Twinkie. I remember back then, like when I was in like the 4th grade, every once in a while, you'd end up having a Twinkie. And they were okay. There's nothing, they had that cream filling. You know what I really like? The Flaky Puffs. I have memories of eating Flaky Puffs, getting home from school, and I had just bought an Atari system. Atari was cutting edge back then. And I would go in my room with a Flaky Puff. My father would buy either the chocolate or the strawberry variety of Flaky Puffs. I think Vachon made them. Said by Vachon, whatever that is. And I'd go in my room and I'd start playing, and every time I'd clear a board, I'd take a bite out of the Flaky Puff, and then I'd continue playing with the joystick. I loved playing Missile Command back then, Space Invaders, had asteroids. Everything looked primitive compared to now, but we thought it was cutting edge. The other one I liked playing, which was as basic as you can get of a design, you were square. Adventure, you were square, and you had to kill these ridiculous looking dinosaurs or dragons, whatever they were, and you had an arrow, literally an arrow, that was a sword to kill them with. Very cheesy game, but it would occupy your brain. And then, what else? Did I say Space Invaders? That was the first one. That actually came with the actual game. But very, very primitive. I mean, we thought in those days, oh wow, look at this thing. You don't have to go to the arcade anymore. You can stay home and play. And nowadays they have stuff like, I'm not against playing these things in moderation, you know, maybe a half hour a day. But I see kids now, they're on these phones 7, 8 hours on the weekend, 9 hours on the weekend. You know, that's too much. And I used to go to the arcade too when I was a kid, but I wouldn't spend 6, 7, 8 hours a day there, mainly because I didn't have the money. But, you know, I'd go down there, I'd play, and then I'd leave. But I loved, you know, my favorite games back then, Defender, #1. I loved Robotron. What else? I played Scrambler. I used to play once in a while Tempest. That was a cool game. What else? Time Pilot 84. Love that. That's a good one. Time Pilot 84. Tons of boards, tons of mazes, like things to find. What's another one I played? Some of them I don't even know what their names were. There was one where there was these rings going around, right? And there was like a spaceship inside that you had to get, and you would shoot and eliminate each layer of the force field, and then eventually you'd blow that thing up. Of course, Phoenix was another one. That's not Phoenix, but Phoenix was cool. Phoenix had like, what it had, like 5 boards you had to clear, and then it would repeat again and again and again, the same old thing. You had these eggs that would go like this and turn into birds. You had to shoot them down. At the very final scene, there was like a spaceship with some insect-looking thing in the middle. You had to make a hole into the spaceship and then blow that thing up. And the points, the bonus points, were random. Sometimes you'd get like 10,000 points. Sometimes you'd get 0. So yeah, Smash TV was another one I really loved playing. The karate games I played a lot. Punch Out with Glass Joe. Piston Hurricane. Bald Bull. Pizza Pasta. Kid Quick. The Sandman. What was another one? I missed somebody in there. Bald Bull. I said Bald Bull from Istanbul. Piston Hurricane was from Detroit. Pizza Pasta, obviously. But the game was weird. The more you advanced, the heavier your opponent became. You were the same size, but as you went up, everybody gained weight. Sandman was like 312 pounds or something. That was a big guy. You know, it was a fun time though. I would search for arcades, like when me and my father would be out, like my parents would be driving around on a Sunday. I would look around and see if I could find a new arcade somewhere, and then I'd jot it down, and I'd try and find a train, a line that would go near there, and then the next weekend I was there. I would get on the subway system and find my way towards this arcade. Anyway, that's it. I want to go inside and see what's going on with the rest of my family, and maybe they're watching, I don't know, Mel's Diner, Alice. Alright, that's it for now. Ciao.